Back out. We're coming back out. We're coming back out. All right, guys, thank you for hanging in there. Crazy session we just had about camera settings menus. But now I'd like to introduce up to the Nikon Theater stage someone you just saw in the panel discussion. She's got a brilliant way of photographing lifestyle and people and children and kids in the inner city. Ladies and gentlemen, Audrey Woulard, back to the Nikon stage.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Thank you, Nikon, so much for having me here. It's always such a pleasure. So, what I'm going to talk about kind of is a good segue from what we were talking about with all the camera menus and things of that nature. We are going to talk about your camera, and your light. So basically, that's just bringing your camera out. You're not going to use a lot of different equipment, but I'm going to touch on really about using your camera, no portable reflectors, no strobes, or anything like that. Now, when we start talking about photographing in just ambient lighting, sometimes people say, you don't know how to use strobes. So I do want to put up my slide and say, I do know how to use strobes very well. So just to kind of give you like that whole, behind the scenes look that I can do it with a group, one person. But there is a bit of freedom that you get when you're only using just your camera. So I try to have a bit of a look. Now with this one, I did use off camera with just the speed light. Had it off to the side, and I'm always trying to get a certain look. My goal overall, if I'm just going to use my camera and nothing else, is to bring a bit of my environment in and have it, work in my favor. So if I'm going to match a scene to how I would use a strobe or a flash, it would be something like this. So this was captured strictly with just natural light, no portable reflectors or anything like that. If you can see a little bit at the bottom, this was on the rooftop of one of my studios, it's all white. So what happens is, shooting this in, a high noon situation, I can have my sun, the sun, not my sun, the sun come down, act as if a natural reflector, and bounce right onto my subject's face. So this was captured with a flash. Do you see how when I'm like mixing things in, it keeps my style of photography very, very consistent? So if I decide that I want to just go completely natural light and I don't want to be bothered with a lot of different equipment, I can always just use a strobe if I need to. Now, when we are bringing in strobes, often people will say, hey, we want our strobes to look like natural light. So this was also captured with a strobe. So all of it's starting to look exactly, the same, right? So even with this one here, I'm moving on to just ambient lighting. And so what I'm actually looking for, I will plan a certain session at a certain time of the day. So like something with this, if I know I want to get a good, scene of like the city, I'm always going to make sure that I'm looking for something like a street light or anything that's going to illuminate any sort of lighting onto my client's face. One thing I like to do is, if you can kind of imagine the stage a little bit, when I'm actually photographing, I shoot a lot. You're going to notice that I shoot very, very wide open. But what I like to have is an open pathway. So I can have ambient light coming in front of me and lots of ambient light behind me onto my subjects, and lots of ambient light behind my subject. So if you can think of a very kind of like a trail, if you will, because that keeps everything really nice and airy, and it really makes it very, very easy to bring on any extra lighting so that we can expose for the face. So even here with this group, that was actually in the same setup of just the last girl. I'm getting nice, even lighting on everyone's faces. So then when I do decide that I want to bring in a strobe, it doesn't look all that different. But it's giving me just a little bit of pop of light. Now, the only reason that I brought in a strobe here was because I wanted to illuminate my highlights just a wee bit to give it just a little bit more pop, if you will. So when I like to use a strobe or a flash or a speed light, I like to use it as, it's not my main light. My main light is always going to be the ambient, and this is going to act as a fill. So I'm going to segue into just your camera. This actually captured with a strobe. When I'm looking at ambient lighting, I always want my light to come from the side in some way, shape, or form. I find that a lot of natural light photographers like to expose directly from the face, so we get lots of flat lighting. So if this was captured with the strobe, this was captured with natural lighting. Actually, in completely different years, but they look exactly kind of the same type of setup. So be very aware of your surroundings. And that's the very, very first key. So because I do lots of work in high sun, this will be kind of like give you a good visual of what I would look for. So this was a bright sunny day. I'm going to say probably around like a noon. I'm always looking for some sort of a sidewalk, driveway, anything that's very light colored. Because what you're going to see, my sidewalk is going to act as a natural reflector. What I'm able to do, I can expose for the background. Because how many people here are always, you kind of hear that if you use natural light, you can't get the sky? Isn't that like something that they always say? So it's the same technique as if you're going to bring in a strobe. Expose for the sky. Find something that's very natural, that can really pick up that light and bounce right onto your subject. And then that subject will be more exposed, and this is what you would get. So I'm getting my sky. I've got my sidewalk here, sun's coming down, illuminated onto the face, and then it all works. So how well do you know your gear? So we kind of talked a little earlier with the different camera settings, and so for me, I like to have, I have to have certain gear that's going to allow me to shoot in certain conditions. So like for example, and this is my next slide, and this actually does not read properly because when photographing at high noon, I need a camera that can have a shutter speed that can go as high as it can, which is an 8,000. This reads as if the camera can dial its shutter speed itself. I had to be sleeping when I wrote this slide. But I need to have a camera that can give me the highest shutter possible, which would be like an 8,000. So when I'm using very, very wide apertures in very bright sun, I'm able to control the light that's around me. So now I've mentioned to you about using sidewalks. So we are here in Las Vegas, here for WPPI. So this I shot in Valley of the Fire. So it's the same thought process. Sun, completely bright. You can see how it's kind of, and this is like, it really is not like the shot, but this is like the kind of giving you what you're looking for. But you see how the sun is kind of blown out on the rocks? So with my subject standing on those rocks, it's completely white light right onto the subject's face. So this is what I would get. Now there's a style that I'm going to talk about just a little bit later where I like to have lots of filtered light coming down above my subject, which you kind of will notice in a lot of the images that I'm going to show you. So I like to look for a lot of enclosed areas, which I'll kind of break down in just a minute. But this one here is very reminiscent of having kind of enclosed in those rocks, very, very bright light that's coming down. I knew I'm going to have my rocks as natural reflectors. That's kicking light right onto my subject's face. Everyone, or in this case, this one person, is perfectly exposed. The only thing that I have to worry about when I'm arriving onto a shoot is me and my camera because I'm looking at the surroundings that are in the area that I'm going to shoot in. So even with this one, can you guys guess what the natural reflector is there? It's actually the water. Sun's coming down, kicking right on. I mean, the rock doesn't hurt, but it's really just that water acting as a natural reflector. So she's walking right onto that rock, kicking right up. Now, mention rocks and sidewalks and things of that nature, but always look for something you can actually see the light blowing out on the ground or losing, when they get technical, losing detail, but it goes completely white. So look at this here. It's very, very hard to see it, but she's standing in sand. So when you've got that bright sun coming down, that sand is kicking up and acting as a natural reflector. What I'm doing, I'm changing my position, kind of scooching down. I can get a lot of the foliage in front. So it's not as obvious as I'm using that sand to act as a natural reflector. It's a little hidden, but that's because I'm shooting down and angling my camera up. So like this one is a fun one. I had my subject standing in kind of a walkway, as you can see. I am actually, and it's high noon, completely bright, and I'm not in the enclosed walkway as my subject. I capture this with an 85 millimeter, so of course I've got lots of room where I can move back, right? What I did, because I've got the sun beaming down on me, take my hand, I held it over the lens. So do you see kind of you got that color coming down? That's actually my hand. And the light is just kind of like making this little kind of cool vignette. And I tend to do that a lot, but I have to be in the sun in order to do that. Does that make any sense at all? So we can kind of do different things that we might add in post-processing, but you can get it right there on the fly. Now this is a fun shot. This I captured in an alleyway. And I had to look at the direction of lighting and figure out how, what I was going to capture with my client and make it a little interesting. So let me just show you the setup behind that. See where that light's coming from? It's coming directly from the side. And so what I'm able to do is direct my subject to lean into the light to get the look that I want. So first, to give you my settings, because I was kind of in like a deep alleyway. So this is at ISO 2000, f1.6, and I use an 85 millimeter 1.4. So I have my subject leaning into that light to get a nice, cool, dramatic shot. Sometimes when we're walking into those alleyways, we look and it's like, oh, not enough light. But look around and see what you can do to play with that light to get a completely different look. And it's a great way to kind of, switch whatever you're going to show a client and showing different variety of images. I will always play with what I see. So this is a kind of a fun one. And this is what I was going to talk to you guys about, that whole filtered light setup. I really like to shoot in between buildings and things of that nature. I don't like to use strobes in situations like that because strobes and speed lights will kill a lot of that ambient lighting that's behind my subject. So I have to kind of keep that integrity that natural light tends to give you. So this is kind of a little drawing I did in Photoshop to kind of give you a visual. So I'm always in very enclosed areas, very tall. It's a bright day outside, but those tall buildings, it's going to block a lot of that light off. But because it's coming straight from above, it's going to filter down low. Now, if I'm in between, buildings, I obviously have a bit of a walkway. So I get really close to the edge of that walkway. So that's why I have my subject. I'm usually on the opposite side of it. Does that make sense? And so from there, I can get it to look like that. So because I'm at the very edge of that walkway, same thing, natural reflector, shine onto the face. But all that glorious natural light that's behind her is filtering down, on top of her. Make sense? So these are always really fun shots for me. And I kind of use them in a way to compose, the eye, to go, towards my subject, bring eye level there, but it brings a bit of drama. So what again, same setup, have a nice little pathway. So you've got lots of ambient light behind you, lots of ambient light behind the subject. But what I want to do is, because you've got like those headlights that are behind her in a distance, I'm not trying to obtain the detail in that light. Does that make sense? Because I want it to spread and act like a little bit of a gradient, if you will, behind her. So I want that area to, quote unquote, blow out. So what I'm doing is exposing for my subject in this instance. Because of the time of day, it's always going to be just a little bit darker, so I don't have to worry about getting a sky or anything like that. But I'm exposing for my subject, and then that bright area behind her, which is coming from the from the headlights, is going to blow out. But it's creating the effect that I want. And this is a similar situation here as well. I'm getting that same look, that same drawing your eye to the subject. And we always hear a lot about composition, yes? Rule of thirds and things of that nature. What I like to do is I like to compose with light. So if you've noticed, I'll take the, look around and see what light I've got, going on with my subject. Use it in a way kind of like leading lines. So if I'm using those leading lines, in this instance, I'm using leading lines with the light, and it goes directly to my subject. Again, expose for expose for your subject. If you guys remember, if you anybody watched the panel earlier, and I mentioned active delighting. So this is when this comes into handy in situations like this. So especially the image 2 that I just showed. Behind her, really bright highlights. And she's got on black, a little kind of dark gray. With that active delighting, my camera is able to kind of balance when I'm exposing for the face and everything that's around her with the dark coat, and balance it with those bright highlights so I can get that detail. Because we don't want the coat and everything. I'm not sure how well it shows up here on the screen, but we don't want to lose a lot of that detail where it's just kind of flat and a bit out of gamut. Same thing with this one, but here's what I did. I've got the highlights behind my subject, but I use the lighting that's kind of on either side to kind of bring your eye directly towards her. And that's very, very important, because if you're someone who might not know how to deal with or might run out of ideas in terms of posing or things of that nature, composing with light will take out a lot of that angst. What am I going to do? How am I going to pose them? Just tell them to stand there. Use light to make that picture very, very interesting. If you even look at a lot of the images that I've shown, it's not a lot of posing going on, but I switch up the light a lot to make it an interesting shot. Then that way, I don't have to worry about where do I put her hands, right? Where do the hands go? What do I tell them to do? Well, I'm focused on the light. Now, these shots are always really fun for me. I actually captured this in Toronto, and it was dark outside. So obviously, I'm looking in the background. I wanted those lights, behind her. And this was when I was mentioning white balance on the panel. And I can change things the way that I want it to be changed. So I knew what she was leaning on was going to give me a blue look, right? But I saw behind her, we had blue lights kind of illuminating. So I left that cool setting on to take out the warm colors to get this look. But this is what she was leaning on. Crazy, right? But I knew if she's leaning on H&M, who knows if you lean on H&M, that was going to give me that nice kind of hazy look, but it was going to be blue due to white balance. But instead of fixing it, I'm working with it, composing it with the other side, right? And getting a really cool look. I did the same thing here, except this time it was not H&M. This was the MAC store. She's leaning on the MAC cosmetic store. Behind her, when you have street lights and sometimes they're very orange or they give that red, look. This is when I'm using my white balance again, making sure that my skin tones look great, exposing for my face, but I'm not concerned with what's going on behind her. I want to keep the integrity of that look because, in my opinion, balancing it with that bluish look from the window with the darker colored street lights gives me such an interesting shot. But all I'm doing is being aware of my surroundings, knowing what I'm going to expect, putting my subject into place, and then go from there. Now, you'll notice that I like the color blue a lot. Same thing here, but the only thing I did differently was this. Within white balance, and I didn't mention this part on the panel, within white balance, you can change different settings in order to get different looks. Usually it works better with a strobe because you want to be able to have the light that's shining on the face to correct the skin tone. What I did was I actually used a street lamp to correct the skin tone. Do you know now they've got a lot of those bright white LED, street lights? I happened to luck onto one, and so I set my camera to 3500 Kelvin. And what that does is it counteracts, turns the background blue, but if I'm exposing for that face, it gives me perfect skin tones. That was probably a little technical, but hopefully that part made sense. So again, since I mentioned working with streetlights, let me, get my settings. Nope, I don't have my settings on this file. But this is when I have to know my direction of light and what you're going to get with that direction of light. So let me show you guys a quick pullback. See that? If I had her facing downward, I would get the dark eye sockets, and then that entire just kind of not a good look. So instead, bring the chin up, have the light face down on her, and I can get a really cool, interesting shot. So being aware of what I'm going to get adds to the dramaticness, if you will, of whatever album or what I'm delivering to my client. Now this is a fun shot. So if you just look at this image, and I just showed it, to whomever I'm going to show it to, it actually would appear as if I used gels. Yes? This is completely natural light. This is a setup on this. So if you look at this setup, where that red X is where my subject was standing. I'm walking up to this location, and I see the dark yellow, gross lights that are in a garage. But if I bring her right on that edge, I'm able to perfect my skin tones, expose for my subject, and then I can get that really cool background. And I think I can go back and show you again what that looks like, and maybe I cannot. There we go. Get the real, nice, good skin tones. Background has that really interesting, look back there, and no one is none the wiser on how I captured it in terms of lighting. And so that's what I mean, is like you can really get dramatic in the simplest terms if you just look around and see what's there. So let's go back. Now, the funny thing is that with cloudy days is when it gets a little difficult. There's not a lot of light to play around when it's cloudy. So the best way I find to play with light on cloudy days is to kind of move my way up to some sort of obstruction, building something that's going to give me some sort of a shadow, because I think shadows adds drama. So if with this particular image, I've got my subject, she's kind of close to like a building, if you will. So that's blocking off a lot of just the regular, light that's there. And I've got my light on the side of her, and that's making that a little brighter than this side. I find it's a good way to kind of break that up. So in this shot here, same thing. If you notice, at camera left, where her face is and the leg is kicking up, that's a lot brighter than the other side, right? So even though it's a cloudy day, your sun is still in the sky, and it's still going to offer you some sort of directional light. But she actually has, you can kind of see it here a little bit, she's got some huge building on the side of her. So it looks like she's in the perfect spot. Nice, good, bright lights, highlights on her, beaming down, making it look a little bit more dramatic than a gross, flat day would be. But I'm looking at what's there, making sure, all of that works, and then, bringing in that dramatic look. You can even see, if you look along her clothes, you can see the direction of the light. But if I had her in a really open area, it would be completely flat. I mean, would it be, not a shot that you wouldn't want? You would like the shot, but to have that to differentiate your highlights and your shadows, that's actually what makes any image, dramatic. So, just to kind of show you, I would do the same thing with the strobe. You see how it just gets a little brighter, with the highlights, and obviously with the strobe, you would turn it up, turn it down. But using the same setup, I get the same look, but that's just all natural light. So in this image here, you can really see that building. So do you see how the shadows are being cast, like onto her face? That breaks all of that up, because like I said, flat light is okay, is great, but if you don't have elaborate outfits, styled stuff, you want to really play with that light. So here, same thing here. She's next to a building. Yes, that's real snow. I'm from Chicago, so we are not shy of snow out there. But same thing. I'm able to really, have her next to some sort of a building, block off a lot of that lighting, right onto the face. you get your dramatic shot. So the biggest takeaway from this would be make sure you're looking at your surroundings and learning how to control those highlights and those shadows. And you can do that with whatever's around you. You can do that with, positioning yourself in certain areas. All of that is a really good way to really break up all of, that light. You also can use clothing. You guys ever think about using clothing to bring in a lot of that drama? So this particular slide was one of my favorite slides, and it's such a simple technique. We're afraid of using hoods or hats because it'll block off a lot of the light that might be illuminating onto the face, onto the eyes. So what I like to do is if I'm using hats, hoods, coats, you can even sometimes, use hair. I would have my subject and directly in front of them, something bright building, open sky. But if you're going to have buildings, it needs to be really far, behind them, so that can really illuminate onto that face. Bringing that hood there, what it's going to do is it's going to bring in lots of good shadow detail. But having that bright area in front of them, I get really bright eyes. Because yes, when we have those close-ups, the very first thing that we think about is having those really, bright eyes. In addition to that, having something light in front of them gives you what? Really, really cool catchlights. And having those dramatic catchlights is what will make a killer headshot. And so with this particular shot, one last thing I want to tell you, because sometimes when we were talking about posing, remember earlier I said I really don't pose? But I will dictate expression. So one thing that I like to do is I'm having one of my clients look directly at me. I always tell them to do this. Look down at the ground. And I tell them to look there, just keep looking there, because what they need to do is relax that face. Because it's the tension in the mouth, tension in the eyebrows, that's going to take, a good headshot to a great headshot. So as I'm having them look down at the ground, relaxing that face, and as soon as I notice that that face is nice and relaxed, I'll tell them, look at me with your eyes. And right there, that always prevents that look from nice and serious, because the whole nice and serious to they look angry type, you know what I mean? That comes from that anger, I guess, look, that comes from having the eyebrows that are fixed and kind of frowny, and then the mouth, the tension in the mouth. So having them look down, relax the face, and then as soon as you see that face relaxed, look directly, with the eyes. So hopefully that helped everybody. Thanks so much.
Ladies and gentlemen, the wonderful Audrey Woulard. You, your camera, your light. That was beautiful. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Okay, I can't believe I'm up here saying this,